Great. So in this webinar, we'll be talking about how to build a healthy home and some really basic principles that underpin a healthy home. I am going to share my screen. So I will start with the presentation and then I'm going to move it on to Narelle McDonald, who just introduced herself. And as mentioned, Narelle has a background in building with her and her husband, Doug, and also is an experienced building biologist who specifically specializes in building healthy homes. All right, so building biology is an emerging field that supports the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of the occupants within the built environment. It is the next generation of green building, although I don't like to use the word synonymously because what has happened in relation to the push for sustainable and green buildings, we have inadvertently increased our exposures to things like condensation and mold, as well as increased exposures to toxicants as a result of inadequate passive ventilation. So as a result of this move, we are finding that many of the new homes being built are actually increasing and escalating health problems in patients. And there's certainly a lot of data that's coming out on this now, especially in cool temperate climates. The founding principle of building biology is to mimic nature as much as possible. And when it comes to building biology, basically what we do is we're like I guess the best description is like the GP for the environment. We go in, we identify, are there health hazards in the built environment that could be impacting families, and then referring on to appropriate people in order to improve their health and to fix the problem. That involves working closely with integrated clinicians who suspect that their patients are unwell as a result of being in a water damaged environment or being exposed to elevated electromagnetic fields or chemicals or lead or something like that. And of course, working with restorers, remediators, electricians, working with, other mold remediators, etc. So identifying what is the problem and who needs to get involved in order to fix it. So we're like the middle person, so to speak, at the middle of it and coordinating with a big network of other trades and health practitioners. A lot has happened in the last 5 years that has eventually resulted in changes in legislation, both in the UK and in New Zealand. And in 2017, New Zealand published their Healthy Homes Guarantee Act and the regulations on residential tenancy healthy home standards, mandating that landlords must act if the house is not fit for habitation or impacting human health. There have also been changes to the regulation, to the Residential Tenancy Act here in Victoria that was taken into effect from March this year, and I did a talk about that. So for all of our previous webinars, go to the college website, that's aces.edu.au, click on information session and you'll see all our previous webinars available there. The information for this particular webinar comes from my book, Chapter 6 on Building and Renovating, where we look at the basic tenets of the principles involved in renovating and building healthy homes. And the Building Healthy Home course, the college offers a course specifically on building healthy homes, and it involves 2 subjects, building materials and building design, both of which Narelle McDonald, who will be speaking tonight, teaches. She's the trainer for these courses. They are 120 hours each, and they will go into very specific information on how to rate building materials for their impact on human health, for their impact on air quality, condensation, mold, hygroscopicity, for example, and of course, toxicant exposure and their impact on the electroclimate of the home. So if you're interested in the information we're providing tonight, then more information can be found in these subjects. The duration of each of those is 12 weeks, so it's a 24-week course part-time, and you can enroll anytime because they are online. So for this talk, what we're going to focus on is in 5 areas. The first of those is location, because if you don't get the location right, everything you do in terms of build the home is really second best. And the reason is because if you build near heavy traffic, if you build near industry, if you build near golf courses or an open cut mine or coal seam gas exploration, etc., you're already going to be on the back foot, because every time you open up that window, you are going to expose the family to known hazards. And some of these hazards will be known carcinogens. So it's really important to think about the location and the block itself, its proximity to hazards, and I'll speak specifically about that. Then Narelle's going to talk more about how to minimize condensation and mold, and some really important tips on, at the building stage, the design stage, what you want to do to reduce the risk of condensation and mold, which without doubt would be the most common reason why someone would employ a building biologist, because they suspect their house has been water damaged, they've got asthma or allergies or fatigue-like symptoms, long-term, or autoimmune disorders, which they suspect may be due to water damaged buildings. And there's been a lot of data lately to indicate that water damaged buildings may be contributing to a significant proportion of patients who were diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and autoimmune disorders like MS, which we see a lot of, and historically often seeing them when the water damage occurs. So we need a lot more research on this. This is not confirmed in the data. It's correlation only as opposed to causation, but watch this space. I have no doubt in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a much better idea as to the impact of mold on human health. The other one we'll focus on is how to avoid exposure to electromagnetic fields, which is actually really easy to do at the design stage. Once the house is built, getting a building biologist to address mold and EMFs becomes much more costly, as opposed to bringing in these really simple principles that will support the health of the family. And of course, minimizing exposure to chemicals and in sealants, in building materials in general, etc., and glues. Then we'll finish off with water filtration and why everyone needs a water filter. Okay, so let's start with location. The site, it's important that it's away from air pollutants, and I'm talking here about traffic-related air pollution, which will be the #1 exposure to pollutants. We know if you live within 200 meters of heavy traffic, and it's not necessarily heavy traffic, it could be just that the traffic stops and starts. It could be a T intersection. When cars accelerate, they emit more fossil fuels than any other time. So living, say, for example, on the other side of the road of a primary school is problematic, especially if you're an asthmatic or have respiratory problems, lung-related pathology or cardiovascular disease, because you will escalate your risk for more of those disorders. Air pollutants could also be things like flight paths. Living within 7 kilometers of a flight path, especially when they're decelerating and accelerating, will expose yourself to noxious gases and other forms of toxicants, which can, again, escalate respiratory type of symptoms and also cardiovascular disease. Noise. Obviously, if you're living, in a noisy neighborhood as a result of traffic again, or, I remember one particular assessment we did with 14 students. We went to the site, and every 7 minutes in the backyard, I had to stop talking because a Boeing 747 was 200 meters above me as it was approaching Melbourne Airport. And it was like, here we are doing the building biology assessment of a home, and I had to stop talking because we could see the belly of the plane cover the entire property. It's going, and then wait till it passed until the next 7 minutes. So, that alone is like a friggin' massive red elephant. You wouldn't even think about buying a place like that because the noise, the pollutants, it's just massive red flags, massive. You can't have a healthy home in that environment. So when the elephants are obvious, then it's really clear that maybe this doesn't matter how much money you put into building a healthy home. If you've got a Boeing 747 belly going over your house every 7 minutes, that's problematic. And of course, trucks and things like that, B doubles, being on traffic, heavy traffic and freeways, etc., in close proximity, and I mean within 500 meters, and you can hear the traffic, that can already be symbolic that may not be ideal in terms of your exposure to noxious gases, air pollutants, and other things like this. Noisy neighbours, how do you know unless you camp out the house before you buy as to how bad the neighbours are going to be? That can be very problematic as well. Electromagnetic pollution, being in close proximity to mobile phone base stations, substations, high voltage transmission lines may also increase your risk. So thinking about air noise and EMF pollution, and of course, dwellings ideally should be well apart from one another amid green areas. And I think we've really identified how important green areas are since COVID, because literally so many people are moving out of the city. The cost of residential apartments in the city has dropped 100,000 apparently, because people don't have green zones. There's not enough green zones, and you're at the mercy of everyone above, below, and around you. And you've got a tiny little balcony that's your space. And I think people are really appreciating now the ability to just go outside into a backyard and, be exposed to sunshine, have chooks and other things like this. So that green space is also filtration. I live in an area where I can look out every window and I can see trees. Now, that means that's the filter. Instead of my lungs being the filter, that's the filter. And that's a big reason why I end up living in the area that I lived in. And these are the sort of things that I would consider. The downside of that is that my gutters get clogged up very, very quickly from leaf litter. And every 6 weeks I'm on the roof clearing out the leaves because I live in a vegetated area. So there's always pros and cons. So as I mentioned, air pollution hotspots that I'd be mindful of when I'm looking on Google Maps at the block that you want to buy is its proximity to traffic, especially traffic that's stopping and starting in close proximity to your block of land. That's problematic. Pesticides, without doubt, pesticides are one of the worst chemicals you can be exposed to. They are often affiliated with neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and attention deficit hyperactivity, right up to the other end of the scale, neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. It's not a coincidence that they're finding Parkinson's clusters amongst farmers using specific pesticides. And in the first paper that I published in the scientific literature, when I was looking at what environmental chemicals can cause which chronic illnesses, pesticides came up time and time and time again. So they're definitely my number one worst chemical. It's something that I've found over the years, many people who live within a kilometre of a golf course will often have elevated levels of pesticides in their blood. So that's important to check, because it's very, very common. No matter how healthy your diet is, no matter how organic your food is, you will often have, very high levels of these pesticides in the body if you're living within 1 or 2 kilometres of a farm where there's crop dusting or aerial spraying, if you're living within a golf course where they're spraying heavily very often in order to keep that turf green, etc. Even things like timber plantations, people often move to places like Tasmania, for example, and they might be in a beautiful, pristine environment. Lo and behold, they're next to a pine plantation. And what people don't understand is that before they fell the trees, they actually spray the entire area with toxic pesticides to kill the wildlife off before they actually chop down the trees, which exposes the neighbours to often very high levels of pesticides. So these are the sort of things you want to research before you buy a block of land. Other things like industry, living in the western suburbs, for example, understanding how air flows. Often the drift from the western suburbs in Melbourne comes towards Camberwell, which is an affluent area, and they're exposed to a lot of the high toxicants. In Sydney, it seems to be from the port right up to the Blue Mountains, where it settles towards the base. And when I interviewed the top environmental doctors who specialised in chronic fatigue syndrome, they would say that a lot of the patients who are living at the foot of the Blue Mountains, often they're exposed to elevated level of toxicants because of the distribution of the wind from the port and Botany Bay of Sydney towards the Blue Mountains. So understanding wind flow can also be an important marker. At the bottom here, I have a picture of all the mines in Australia. There are hundreds and hundreds of mines. Any open cut mine will release toxic metals into the environment along with the particles. And these include lead and other forms of heavy metals. We know children in Port Pirie and Mount Isa have elevated levels of toxic metals in their body. And the exposure zone is 70 kilometres. So living within 70 kilometres of an open cut mine, you will have detectable levels of toxic metals potentially in the dust of your house. So for that reason, if you built a healthy home in these areas, you'd have to seal the entire house and have full-on air and carbon filters to filter out the ambient air particles because they're toxic. So you're already, on the back foot of what a healthy home means. And of course, the risk now is bushfires are becoming more and more prevalent as a result of climate change. And This is something that even in Melbourne recently, last summer was a very big problem. And as a result of this, you need to be able to seal your house up and put on air filtration systems. This is why I think an air filter is critical for every home, in order to prepare for the fact that this is becoming more common. When trees burn, they actually sequester toxic metals and air pollutants. So they're actually like a filter for the globe. But when they burn, they re-release these toxic metals and particles back into the air, along with the particulate matter. And these are known carcinogens. These are known to aggravate existing respiratory problems and, of course, cardiovascular problems like stroke and high blood pressure. So another issue is, of course, living in an area where people use wood fire open fireplaces in their house. And, in wintertime, when you go outside for your walk, you can smell, the wood burning, which is, I actually quite like the smell, but it's actually really toxic. So these are the sort of things that if you live in environments heavily vegetated, like in my environment where people do have open fireplaces, then at wintertime I have to seal the house and put the air filters on so the kids and I aren't exposed to the noxious gases and the particles generated from other people using open fireplaces in their own home. So air pollution hotspots, as I mentioned, especially flight paths, it's up to 7 kilometres of living within a flight path and a flight zone. You'll be exposed to ultrafine particles, as well as noxious gases, black carbon and volatile organic compounds. Electromagnetic fields, living within 400 metres of mobile phone base station, especially direct line of sight. If you can see a mobile phone base station from a window within your home, there's a good chance you'll be exposed to elevated levels, still within the Australian standard. But remember, the Australian standard by ICNIRP is not a health-based standard and is based on compromise with industry. So often we'll find that the areas or homes that are exposed to the highest level of radiation, they'll often be on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and they'll be within 200 to 400 metres of a mobile phone base station. So if I'm on a 2nd story and I can look out your window and see a mobile phone base station within 400 metres, then, more often than not, my meters will pick up elevated levels in the room that I'm standing in. And if it's a bedroom, that's problematic because we know these radio frequencies impact sleep, and in particular, non-REM sleep. So being near 500 metres within high voltage transmission lines is doubling the incidence of childhood leukemia. That was first looked at in 1979 when the first research came out on children who were living within 600 metres of a high voltage transmission line for the first 15 years of their life, had a doubling the incidence of childhood leukemia. A recent systematic review this year in May confirmed, as a result of 33 studies, that if children were exposed to 4 milligauss or higher, remember the Australian standards allow 2000 milligauss, this research showed, and it was meta-analysis, which is the highest form of research, which is a compilation of 33 studies, found that if children were exposed to 4 milligauss or higher, that their risk for childhood leukemia doubled. So as a result of this has ramifications for building. You would never put someone's bedroom adjacent to a kitchen, for example, as a result of the fridge motor going on and off. You would never have a bedroom near a meter panel because the milligauss could be hundreds of milligauss as a result of the hot water service kicking in the middle of the night. So these are the sort of things that a building biologist will consider. So just to finish off my talk, in my book, I have the exposure zones, how many meters and what the distance you should be away from these known hazards in order to ensure, before you even think about building a healthy home, what the distance should be from external hazards. So now I'm going to take it away to Nell.
Are you just going to keep sharing your screen, Cole?
I will, yep.
Okay. All right, so we'll move straight into condensation and mould. So condensation risk is really influenced by the climate, and we talk about the climate a lot, how the house is built and also how we use it. So design, from a site selection perspective, design features that we are looking for is to make sure that we allow for deflection and drainage. And these are part of the BRANC's, the 4 Ds, which are drainage, deflection, drying and durability. We look for, we make sure that we've got channels to divert surface water away from the foundations, because we definitely don't want any water pooling near the foundations, because that can be really problematic and cause long-term issues. We want to locate the home in a dry or well-drained soil, and we definitely don't want to build above a watercourse or a floodplain. Some houses that I have seen up here that have been built where it appears like there's some sort of underground spring or something near the house, and you've got damp clay-like soils in the subfloor, and no matter how much ventilation or what they do, that subfloor is always damp. Those homes are very hard to fix. And when you look at the topography around those homes, they're sitting at the bottom of hills. You know, they're already compromised. Some of the worst houses I've seen have been at the bottom of hills where they've had nature reserves behind them, and you can see that their subfloor of their houses have been compromised over a long period of time. And so these places need to have full rectification and renovations done to them to change that. So don't build above a watercourse, and know your floodplains. It's really important. If you've got SIRS, you do not want to be building in any sort of reclaimed swamp areas. It's quite common for building to happen over reclaimed swamp, which to me is crazy. And if you've got any sort of mold illnesses, you want to stay away from anything like that. Not building on or into a hill, because you will need extensive drainage, retaining walls. I mean, there's systems like hydro seepage now where they actually build pits that can help divert water away before it hits the buildings, but all of those sort of mitigations can be very expensive. So if you understand the block and the drainage, you should always over-engineer your drainage. That's a really important part of it, because if you don't have good drainage on that block, you can end up with other problems, and you spend all this money to build this beautiful house, but you don't get the basics of your foundations and your drainage right. That can be an issue. Landscaping, people also, the Asthma Foundation has a great low allergy garden guide for those with allergies, but also people often come along and do landscaping and then put plants right up against the building envelope, and then you end up with moisture wicking up through the walls. So that can be an issue. So avoiding that is being really mindful of that in design when your landscape gardener potentially comes along afterwards, and making sure that if you do have it, that there is airflow and it's done correctly, and there's damp proof courses, etc. The construction phase is really important. I do talk about this a little bit because Brandts do some fantastic work in New Zealand, and they talk about the 4 Ds a lot in design and construction, and that is deflection, drainage, drying, and durability. So these are all really important for building materials. If any building materials get wet, we want to make sure that they are dry before they get enclosed, because we obviously know if something's wet and it gets enclosed, there's no air, there's no ventilation, there's no airflow, it can become a problem. So we definitely don't want any wet building materials enclosed.
Can I just add to that now? There's a passive house being built around the corner from me, and the insulation was hanging out of the roof for weeks, getting wet, weeks. So that moisture would be wicking into the roof void. And of course, by the time they seal that building up, there is very likely to be elevated levels of fungal particulate in the rooms below that. So they haven't even moved in. These, you could, as now,
insulation shouldn't obviously be exposed like that to the weather.
Exactly right. And this is a passive house. Like the money they spend to create an energy efficient, healthy home, and at the construction phase, it all falls to bits because of what happens, when they don't prevent materials being wet.
Well, and it's important to have if you are renovating a building, really finding a good builder that's going to listen to you, that you can go and see some of their jobs, have a look at their work, find out how they work with their clients. Are they good communicators? All of those sort of things, because if you want to build a healthy home and you've got some things. So in my reports for my clients, I have a summary to get included into the specifications, so they can be very clear with the builder as they're going along about what they really want to make sure is included. Because if it doesn't get included in the specifications and the other trades aren't aware of it, then it's easy for things to get forgotten. So if it's there from the very beginning, it can make it easier. So you definitely want to be working with a team, and a build is a team-based approach, like a good design team, a good builder, because everyone's working together to ensure that they all bring their knowledge and expertise in the areas that they have, and they share these resources to help create this healthy building. So for me, that's a really important part. It's very much a team-based approach. So communication and making sure that that builder is prepared to work with you, and, you know, is going to have an electrician that you can talk to, that you get time to go through the electrical plan, you know, that you have time to potentially look at other you know, paints or whatever it may be, that the flooring contractor that you hire is familiar with the products that you want to use, and doesn't get it wrong because he just blames the products because he's not used to it, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's important through every stage of the build. So communication in this construction phase is really important. Anyway, don't apply. In relation to concrete slabs and masonry, they do need time to cure, and waterproof coatings you don't want to apply until the concrete has had time to cure. And according to Brandt's, under good conditions, the slab should dry to a depth of approximately 25 mils per month. And the elements that can make a difference to that are weather, temperature, relative humidity, airflow, the concrete composition, that sort of thing. And it's really interesting because a lot of the time when you see these renovation shows, and when we talk about you know, making sure we've got time for things to dry, there's no way that in those shows the wet areas, etc., have enough time for all the elements to be curing, etc. So they make it look like that you can do these things quite quickly, but there's a whole system to what's going on. So you know, it sort of gives this false reality that you can do these things in 24 hours and it's best practice, and it's just absolutely not. Things need time to cure. So cellulose-based materials should be protected from the weather, which we just talked about before. And what I was just mentioning is the sequence of wet construction and finishing trades, such as slab and screed laying, plastering and tiling, to allow the longest drying time. So you don't want to be rushing these type of things. And in more humid climates, you may need some dehumidification to help things dry, particularly if it's summer and the relative humidity is really high. So with building materials, we really want to look at air and surface temperatures to be optimized. So we want to keep them, we don't want large temperature differences. Materials, from a building biology perspective, we want materials that are diffusible and hygroscopic, and so that they don't contribute to condensation and mold. And I'll talk a little bit. Sorry. Oh, I was going to say, I'll talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about the rating tool, but if you wanted to say something in relation to that now.
The reason with air and surface temperatures, it's really important. One material that we're not so keen on as building biologists is metal, because it's cold. And what happens is when you have a lot of water vapor in the house, because you're breathing out 3 liters of water vapor a day, by the time you account for your bathing, washing, cleaning, every person in the house is contributing about 10 liters of water vapor per day. So if you've got 5 people in the house, that's 50 liters of water vapor. When you have water vapor hitting a cold surface, it's more likely to hit dew point, which means it condenses. So this is why steel frames is something we're not keen on unless you're in termite environments and you don't have any other options. When you have metal roofs, there's benefits to that to reflect radio frequencies, But the problem is, especially flat roofs that are metal with very little roof void, when you have the water vapor inside the house coming towards the surface like the ceiling, which is close to a metal roof that's cold, it's more likely to condense. So you have condensation issues because there's large temperature differences between metal surfaces, for example, and things like natural timbers, cotton, hemps, and things like this. So this is one thing a building biologist will look at, is to try and get the surface temperatures inside the house similar to the air temperatures to stop this condensation happening.
Yeah. So like concrete's a high density material, so it requires a large amount of energy to warm it up. So yeah, and then you get larger temperature differences and things like that, and then it depends on the type of heating and where you are and where that room's located and all of those other factors. With building materials and building, it's really important for correct detailing and installation of the roof, cladding, wall cavities, insulation, eaves, flashings and guttering to be done correctly and to be done according to the manufacturer's specifications. These are all really important things, and this comes back to really good building practice. Waterproofing is an area that we see a lot of issues with, and in fact there was that study done.
Now you're frozen.
And it was on apartments, but the most.
So you just froze. I don't know whether it was you or me.
No, can you hear me now?
I can, yep.
Oh, sorry. So all good?
Yep.
Okay. So with waterproofing, some of the common problems could be with workmanship and design error. Sometimes there's inadequate substrate installation. This is why getting these sort of things on the drawings correct is really important. Inadequate perimeter and doorstop use as far as the waterproofing goes, vertical separation and incorrect falls are some of the problems with waterproofing. Waterproofing too, there's different types of waterproofing. There's acrylics, there's polyurethanes, and there's PVC sheets, and they all have different life expectancies or service life. So with an acrylic, which is your cheapest, it's potentially about 7 years. Polyurethane is normally maybe 10, and a sheet membrane is 25. So that's the longest, and the most less likely to fail would be a sheet membrane system. And it's really important as well that you have system to system compatibility chains so that everything is compliant and fit for purpose and goes together. So I think it's really important that the tilers and the builders are all on the same page in relation to this and what they're going to use and how it's going to work and the products that are going to be used. And these discussions are had early, because wet areas can actually, there's quite a lot of work that goes into wet areas, into bathrooms, and they need quite a lot of thought. Consideration given to layout and all the other little bits and pieces. They could, they feel like a really small room and like they're not going to take up that much time, but they actually do need quite a bit of thought with areas to get it right.
Can I just say now, when I think of bathrooms, if I could give people 3 tips, the first one would be spend a bit more to get those sheet-based membranes, because otherwise, as you said, which really shocked me when I found out, is that most bathrooms only have a service life of 7 years, the building warranty. After 7 years,
crazy. Who wants to do another bathroom reno in 7 years?
And most people don't know that. Most people don't know if they spend an extra $1,000 on a proper waterproofing system, that will go from 7 years to potentially 25 or 30 years. And no one tells you this. The second thing that was important that I realized was important was, as now indicated, system to system. I wouldn't get the builder to do the waterproofing. I'd get a company specifically dedicated to do waterproofing who will do the whole system. And all their technicians do is that. They're not builders, they're not carpenters. They only do waterproofing. That's their specialty. That's really important.
It can differ from state to state though.
Okay.
Yeah, I've noticed up here in New South Wales, I had and tilers are few and far between. And I had to get one guy who did the waterproofing, but he didn't do the tiling. And yeah, and it was just like, oh my God, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it made me really nervous, because it was like, I've got one guy coming in to do this and then another guy coming in to do this, and it didn't sit well with me. Whereas in Melbourne, Doug, that they do that differently. So it can depend on where you're located too. But I think this sort of thing, if you have an awareness about it, at least you can have these conversations really early. These are the type of conversations that really help, because if they're left till you've got someone standing on site, it's too late. So that's where they can be really beneficial. The other thing is that all products used to display the AS 46541, and that's the CSIRO, to show it's CSIRO test.
Yeah. Just cut out.
Tested and compliant. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, sorry. And then
Now you've cut out again.
and in bathrooms, to add the arc. Is it better now?
Now it is. Yeah, we just lost the last 30 seconds.
Okay, sorry everyone. It's the I don't know what's going on. Normally it's pretty stable because it's all hardwired, but it could just be the actual the antenna on the roof. Can you hear me now? So can I keep going? Okay, so in bathrooms, architraves ideally to be added after the tiles and to finish above the floor height. So that way they're not going to be compromised by any water in that area. Can also be another good thing. So these photos here are showing from a building biology perspective, balconies above internal living areas can be problematic because they need to be waterproofed. And as I said, it's not uncommon for waterproofing to fail. And if that waterproofing fails above a living area, then you have a scenario where you can end up with real potential mold issues in that space. So this is where these high quality waterproofing membranes that are fit for purpose are very, very important. So as I said, we're going to talk about climate and microclimate quite a bit because it actually plays such an important part. There's no one solution to suit all of Australia because we have the 8 climate zones. But we really need to think about your building structure and the climate zone, particularly in relation to vapour membranes, which is what we're going to talk about next. So with vapour membranes, again, it's a system approach, so it has to consider climate, air tightness, ventilation, insulation, moisture, and moisture control. What we like to see is permeable vapour wraps that are in a way that they are at a distance, so there's air gaps from the battens so they don't make contact with the walls or the roof. So we really want to be able to ventilate any water vapor and if any condensation forms, and that has the ability to drain away. The last thing we want is water getting stuck inside these cavities, and then you end up with stud frames that are rotting or anything like that. So we want to make sure that no water vapor and no condensation gets stuck inside these cavities. So this is where this is really important. So now in Australia, just recently due to changes to the NCC, you know, you have to use certain types of vapour wraps within certain climate zones, etc. And every different cladding system will have, according to the manufacturer's installation instructions, the correct way that should be done. And it will be a little bit different depending on the build and the cladding system, the climate, etc., etc. So as I said, wall cavity systems need a water resistant drainage plane to allow water to drain. You need to drain the rain away from the plane. We don't want any water, sitting water pooling anywhere near our building envelope. Window flashings, tapes, wall membranes, and window perimeters. We want all of these to be weather tight and to be done correctly. Again, we see thermal bridging when you've got standard aluminium frames with no thermal break. They are a real problem because they allow for thermal bridges. So thermal bridges are pathways for heat and cold to cross from inside to out and vice versa. And we really want to avoid thermal bridges. So materials with high conductivity are most likely to create thermal bridges, and they are aluminium, steel, concrete. So I think cold materials. But if you've got an aluminium frame that's thermally broken, it's going to inhibit condensation forming. So really think about glazing as a really important part of the build, because your windows are quite a vulnerable part. You can get a lot of heat loss through these areas, but if they're not sealed properly and they're a poor quality frame and glazing, you're already a little bit on the back foot. This is already potentially going to be causing you a problem. So glazing is an area that I would spend more money on. I wouldn't scrimp on. I would go for really well insulated, high quality frames with minimum double glazing, and make sure, because the last thing you want is water intrusion through your unit if it's not well sealed. Roof design is another thing. So there's obviously quite a few different roof designs. One thing that flat roofs can be more problematic because of falls and gradients, etc. And then they often have box gutters within those designs, and they can be more of a problem because they're hidden and you don't sort of see what's going on, and then they can cause issues. So again, roof design is quite complex. It's going to depend on a whole lot of factors. Most roof constructions, they should be ventilated and include air gaps in their design to allow condensation to be carried or drained out. And we want them to be easy to maintain because we're not getting up there all the time. But there's many different roof designs, and each has their own sort of, can have issues depending on the orientation and where they're located and that sort of thing. But for me, low pitched with box gutters are one to try and avoid as a general rule if you can. Otherwise, they need to be designed properly so that it's definitely not going to become an issue.
Can I just say now, a flat metal roof is just such a common for mold problems, like, oh my God.
Exactly.
Do not build a flat metal roof with no roof void, because you are in for a disaster in 10, 20 years time.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, I haven't actually lived in one myself, but yes, so they are prone to problems, definitely. Appropriate gutting with preventative overflow measures is really important. I think, Nicole, you just installed the Grapta system, didn't you, on your place?
Not yet.
Oh, you're not yet.
Because
okay.
of COVID, it was all delayed. But basically what it is I've got an existing gutter system, and they come in and just put a spacer. So they pull it out about a 10 mil or so. So in heavy rain, it just basically prevents the moisture coming into the roof void. So it ends up being like a sheet of water coming down from your house. Obviously, the drainage immediately around needs to be good, but it just stops water coming back into the eaves and into the roof void. So this is a simple thing. It really is a little bit more labor, but the cost of the spaces is very little. And I think this is a fantastic thing that they can do to prevent, in that 1 in 20 rain event, which is happening a lot more common, to stop moisture penetrating into the roof.
That's actually with the box gutters, because of their type of design. I know Tim Law sort of said that flat planes that incorporate box gutters are prone to leaking due to the low gradient, but they require at least a bare minimum fall. And I know the gutter and downpipe provisions for housing with block gutters, they must cope with a 5-minute duration rainfall intensity and a 1 in 100-year average reoccurrence interval. And because of the way the weather's changing, you know, these sorts of things could have to change as well, because these weather events and patterns are becoming more common. Yeah. Installing downpipes every time the roof changes direction or every 12 metres is important, because you definitely,
which is not in the code. So it's really important that there are downpipes every time the roof changes direction. This is another common issue we're finding all the time in moisture in roof voids, is to make sure that you over-engineer the stormwater system and the downpipes at least every 12 metres and every time that roof changes direction.
Yeah, so with all my reports and all my clients, these are the sorts of things I talk about so that they can go back to their design team, and these are the sorts of things that go on the drawings at design stage, so that, you know, they're captured in the specifications and they're included in the build. I didn't realise that that wasn't in the code with the downpipes, actually. That's interesting. Eaves are essential to protect walls against wind-driven rain, really important. Again, where I talked about the 4 Ds, deflection, drainage, drying and durability. Flashing around structures, definitely want to make sure that this is done correctly, because they're obviously a weak point because they're a penetration. So if they're compromised, then that can cause problems. And as we said before, balconies built into roofs are problematic because of the waterproofing issues, which are not uncommon. So adequate ventilation is really important, and adequate ventilation in wet areas, because of the amount of humidity and water vapour that's produced in these areas. It needs to be able to leave and be vented externally. Home design, the orientation, your layout and your breeze paths are all really important, and they all work together for ventilation. You want to position windows, doors and have window types that can allow for that, to help with those breeze paths, to help move the natural ventilation through that home for you. So this is where open plan design and positioning of windows, etc., and the type of window, so you can direct breezes through, is really important. And this is why we talk about orientation so much, because if you're not orientating the building correctly, you are already on the back foot. You want to work with the climate, not against it, because it just makes your job so much easier. The use of ceiling fans is really effective, and they've actually done some studies where they showed the evidence from Darwin, Brisbane and Sydney. They showed that the aircon could be reduced by 75% when combined with ceiling fans, because fans are more effective at moving air over people, and so they can make a difference by about 3 degrees. So they're really effective. Spatial zoning, so using zones to help regulate temperature, is another way. And as I said before, exhausting water vapour from kitchen, bathroom and laundry to exterior, not to the roof void. Now, interestingly enough, that only came into the NCC in 2019. And I mean, building biologists have been saying this, since the 70s, that we shouldn't be venting anything into any roof void. So it's a really important thing, and it has caused a lot of problems in a lot of homes, because we definitely don't want that anything going into the roof void, any sort of water vapour.
Can I just add to that now, with regards to the venting the water vapour, say from a bathroom, what we're talking about is actually having an industrial fan, not just a cheap $10 fan from Bunnings, an industrial fan that's actually vented to the exterior. So it would have the ductwork. Ideally, that ductwork would be insulated, because if you have water vapour going through the ductwork and it's cold, then it's going to condense in the ductwork. So that's why ideally that would be insulated, and it would have either a whirlybird or a vent at the top to pull that water vapor out, especially if it's a Colorbond roof.
Yeah, and they can work really well. They can be on sensors like humidity sensors and stuff like that, timer, yeah, so that they connected to the light, so you know, say if it was a rental and you didn't have much control, you know that every time that person's using the bathroom, it's connected to the light, so they have no choice for that fan but the fan goes on, sort of thing. Yeah, so that's it seems like a small thing, but it's actually a massive, it can cause so many problems. And in homes built in the last 20 odd years, many homes have this issue, and it is a major problem for mold and condensation. So now we'll move on to electromagnetic fields. So the beauty of EMFs and design is that if you consider wiring at design, there's a whole heap of things that you can do. The moment those internal linings go on, it gets a lot harder, but you can do a lot of, you can hardwire, you can put data points, you can bundle your wiring because that will help cancel out fields. You can ensure that your smart meter or your meter panel is placed well away from where anybody is spending time. And you can make sure that you've got the NBN conduit area again away from where people are spending time, because you need to give thought to this beforehand, because otherwise if you don't, then the NBN guys will just come in and just put it at the closest point, and in a lot of Melbourne homes that could be a main bedroom at the front of the house. So we want to make sure that we're creating distance, and this is it's actually pretty simple to do at design stages, avoiding junction box coming into bedrooms and things like that. So using your garages or areas where people don't spend time, avoiding dimmer switches where possible, or speaking to the electrician about how to keep those wires together. I always like to say with people at design stage to really sit down with the electrician and the electrical plan at the beginning, and to really think about how they live, work and play in their homes, because and know where all their beds are going to be placed and all their furniture, their computer equipment, etc. That's all really important, because then you can incorporate this into the design, and then you can have enough data points in the areas that you're going to need them, and you're not trying to fix things afterwards. So really considering how, like I said, how you live, work and play in these spaces, and wire it accordingly, ensuring that your fridge and your oven, that there is no major appliances on a bedroom wall. So you wouldn't want to have your child's bedroom, say for example, and the study on the other side, and all of the electrical equipment is on the other side of the wall. And the way it's been designed is it's got a door, it's got a built-in robe, it's got a window, and the only wall that's left to place your child's bed on is the wall of the study where all the equipment is. So doing all of these sorts of things at design stage is really beneficial, and it's really easy because you're just making sure that you're preventing all of these potential problems. So Wi-Fi routers, boosters, extenders, again, shouldn't be in areas where people spend time or in bedrooms, and definitely smart meters, meter panels and inverters for solar systems all want to be well away. That includes cabling. You can also look at options to have each bedroom on its own circuit, and wiring free walls can work well in bedrooms as well. You can use demand switches, things like that. So there's lots that can be done just by giving thought at the electrical plan stage. If it's a two-story, then more thought needs to be given as well as to what's happening in relation to what's going on above and what's happening below. So particularly when you've got young children that could be playing on the floor. So that's an area that's important. Lighting is quite a big area, but building design for light, some of the things to think about are optimizing for daylight. And again, this comes back to orientation, solar orientation, window glazing, room use. You can use side and top lighting, light shelves, all of these sorts of things. Where do you need task lighting? Where do you need more ambient lighting for evening? Often we have open plan areas and we might have different usages. Sometimes people work at dining room tables at night. So it's good to have like task lighting, and also then different types of pendant lighting or something like that, where you can really create a more ambient feeling at night and start to get everybody sort of in the zone and quietening that house down by not having all of like too much lighting. We want to avoid too much glare. We definitely want to avoid energy saving lamps. This table here from Nicole's book is really good. It summarizes and highlights the different things that we're looking at from a health perspective, etc. But yeah, I like, from a design point of view, just looking at how you optimize your daylight, your solar orientation, and really thinking about how you're going to use, again, it comes back to thinking about how you're going to use the space. So from a design point of view, really having those really deep thoughts about what you're going to do in this home, who's using it, what rooms you use for what, can make a big difference. You make sure that design really suits from a functionality point of view for you and your family. So now we're going to talk a little bit about chemicals. We sort of touched on this before in relation to the building biology rating tool. So if you do the course, this is something that you will see in the building materials subject. So we rate building materials according to their effect on the building internal environment, and we look at production, you know, the material as a whole. So we look at its natural occurrence, its energy consumption, thermal properties, all of that sort of thing, and then we rate it, and then it has an overall rating. So you can see here I've used timber as an example because timber is a great material, but if that timber is painted, it sort of changes a little bit, so that would change it how we would rate that on the rating tool. And again, this timber here that we've used as an example has been treated with CCA. So again, you can see under J, we've given it a 0 for the health impact, which means that's a problem. And we've also given it, a lower rating because of the overall impression of the material, which is K. And we've also under H, you can see for toxic vapors and gases, it's got a lower rating than the natural timber above it. So this is, it's not an exact science, but it's a way, when we're first learning about materials, to gain that sort of understanding of them and to get a feel for for that material and the differences, because there can be different scenarios. So timber can, as I said, it could be treated with preservative, it can be painted, it could have a polyurethane finish on it, or might have a wood oil, and that's going to change that a little bit, because obviously if you seal a timber, it's not going to be as hygroscopic, that sort of thing. So this is how we use this sort of rating tool, just to give us an idea about the different materials. So what we like from a building biology perspective with building materials, we like to use as natural materials as possible. We really, of course, want to make sure that these materials don't emit any toxic vapors in the home. We like to use things like wood oils, natural paints, or non-toxic alternatives. So we apply the precautionary principle when we're looking at materials, and if there's something that we're not sure of, we look to see, is there another alternative? Is there another option to this product? You know, what could we use? We'll look at cabinetry, no or low emission materials, obviously low VOC adhesives. And I've talked about this a lot already in relation to glazing and window types that consider solar gain and crossflow ventilation. So glazing is a really important part. And with building materials and building a new home, all of these little pieces of the puzzle, when they come together overall, you're already making a huge difference to this building. Because if you think about the flooring, for example, it covers a massive part of the building. So if you pick a better flooring, the same with the paint, all of these areas, if you're making differences to the chemical exposures within that building, plus it's being ventilated, and you've got natural cross-flow ventilation as well, it's already making big changes and big improvements to that home. So sometimes it seems like it's not that much, but overall, when these all come together, it actually makes a big difference. So indoor air quality, it always comes back to indoor air quality. Natural ventilation and airflow start with optimal orientation. You'll probably be sick of me saying that by the end of this. Insulation, well-placed insulation and material choices that help regulate temperature, correctly installed and adequate ventilation in areas such as kitchens, bathrooms, laundries, your subfloor and your roof, super important, and careful selection of materials, products and components that enhance human health and contribute to healthy indoor air quality. And this is what I mean when I say we're always sort of asking questions in relation to these products. So three control strategies with indoor air quality are source elimination, control and dilution, are all really effective for indoor air quality. And so heating and cooling again is really based on the climate and the microclimate, and we want to design for balance between heat storage and thermal insulation in living spaces. So we've got our different climates here in Australia. So climate zone 1 and 2, we need to pay most attention to effective cooling. It's more humid. 3, it's still cooling, but it's a little bit easier because it's drier. Whereas 4, 5 and 6, we want that balance between reducing heat and cooling, and in 7 and 8, we need effective heating measures. So in a tropical, humid, cooling climate, we need insulation that keeps heat out, but we don't want to restrict hot air from escaping. Maximum shading is really important, as in ventilation and heat release. Lightweight construction because it cools down faster, and light colours. Whereas in temperate, which can be more of a heating, anything latitude south of the tropics, we need winter sun to penetrate living areas, and we can use thermal mass so that gets absorbed and stored by the building materials and re-released in the cooler evening. And orientation is very, very important in heating climates, particularly in cool temperate. And on the next page, I'll show you some different pictures just so you can see some different design features. You can see here, this is a northern orientation in this living room, so that's a priority. Incorporating correct positioning of thermal mass that is well insulated from external temperatures. So this has the brick, the fireplace within the brick cavity on a concrete hearth, and that gets northern sun in the winter. Hydronic heating is really fantastic in these type of climates, and it works very well for those with allergies. There's no dust, particulates. We had hydronic heating in our Edwardian that we renovated in Melbourne, and I absolutely loved it. And the beauty of that actually was when you open the front door, because we did the we had recycled boards, and we did them in Olivos wood oil, and you could just smell the timber. It's really lovely. High quality minimum double glaze and insulated glazing, so you don't have issues with thermal bridging, and alignment of doors and windows for cross-flow ventilation. So that's showing that sort of more temperate climate, where here this is for a more tropical, humid climate. So high ceilings, narrow designs work really well, because then it's really easy to cool these rooms down. Open plan pavilion style homes, you always want to have generous eaves because you want to protect the building envelope. Windows that have maximum opening, covered outdoor decks, tinted windows to keep the heat out, hard flooring. I really don't need carpets or anything like that in these type of climates. Ceiling fans, split systems, I prefer, because they are much easier to be cleaned. You can get them deep cleaned every year. So if you do have any condensation forming on the coils, they can be flushed out, and you know that every year you've got a nice clean split system. Plus you can run them on dry. They don't cost a lot to run on dry, but it can just help you keep that relative humidity down when you need to. There are sometimes up here that the humidity is just too high, and I will run these split systems on a dry or cooling mode. And it's not that expensive, particularly on the dry mode. Open shelving, anything to promote airflow, louvered storage doors, that sort of thing, not closing things off too much where they can stagnate. You know, if you use canvas or anything like that in laundries and seal things up, they'll go moldy. So we want to promote airflow and make those storage areas more accessible like that. In relation to heating, passive heating and shading should always be considered together. Adequate insulation and glazing to suit the environment. Radiant heating is definitely my favourite type of heating, like hydronic. Hydronic slab heating works really well. You just want to make sure it's not electric, because otherwise you will introduce high electromagnetic fields into the space, and we definitely want to do that. Heat recovery ventilation can work very well and is used in passive homes. So that brings fresh air into well-sealed homes. And then with slow combustion. So we really want to avoid fireplaces and definitely unflued gas heaters. There's many adverse health effects in relation to that. And I think Nicole wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, definitely with patients with allergies, etc., you do not want to blow air around the home to heat, so ducted heating, etc., because all your allergens are sitting in the dust. And of course, if they are blown around the home, they're going to be in the breathing zone, and then the allergies will just escalate. House dust mite allergy, for example, pollen, it's pet danders, etc. So definitely want to do radiant heat as much as possible. As Nell mentioned, hydronic slab heating is good, not the electric one, of course, because it can emit very high magnetic fields. But yeah, even the enclosed canaras can be good. The only problem is someone has to clean them and then expose themselves to that ash in the process. So you probably have an air filter on and a mask if possible. But yeah, unflued gas heaters should never be anywhere because they release noxious gases, which can be lethal, and release noxious gases that can also instigate asthmatic attacks.
And then cooling. So again, all of this works together. So the more that you consider these and get these things to work together, the better passive design will work for you. So shade, reflective surfaces and airflow for cooling. Cooling requirements can be achieved by incorporating glazing, cross-flow ventilation, ceiling fans, shading and insulation. So again, if you get all of these things in place, it really takes away the amount of mechanical cooling that you really need to use, because you've got all of these other factors in place working for you. As I mentioned, in humid climates, efficient reverse cycle air conditioning set to 23 combined with ceiling fans.
Can I just say now, a lot of the mold problems we're seeing in homes is because people are setting the reverse cycle air conditioner at 18 degrees.
I was just about to say that, because my kids will do that too. I'll come in and they've turned it down to 18. I'm like, what are you doing? Because it means that you get a lot more condensation on the coils. Yeah. So yes, actually knowing how to run that can make a difference.
Yeah, look, sometimes that's been the cause of the fungal particle in the house. It's simply come from the split system.
And kids will often do it.
Buggers.
And there are split systems that are coming out onto the market now that do have air purification. I know Mitsubishi has a model. But again, as soon as you start combining this type of systems, it's not going to be as effective as it's like a dedicated air purification system. It just doesn't have the same capacity, but it is there as a potential option where it might be the most viable solution. And if you're using ducting, then ducting requires complete enclosure by ceiling insulation. But yeah, integrated pest management, again, we want to avoid using pesticides ourselves wherever possible. And in design, we really want to make sure we limit the spaces where they can come in. So like tight fitting cabinetry, etc., in the kitchen, making sure that everything there's no holes or gaps left, because we want to make sure that we get rid of their food, their shelter, and that we create physical barriers, whether that be with the Termi mesh or those sorts of products, to limit places for them to take up residence. So we want to think about that. We can look at resistant timbers, metal fly screens, as I said, Termi mesh, all of those sorts of options when it's being built, so that we avoid having issues with that later on. There's some good websites that are listed here if you are interested in finding out a bit more from an IPM point of view. But yes, in summary, if you incorporate all of these measures, as I said, into a build, you are already making a humongous difference, a huge difference to the health of this home, because you're getting those basics right. And then when it comes to what you bring in afterwards, you know, you're already on the front foot, because you're not dealing with a whole lot of chemicals or anything else that are already within the build. You definitely don't want to be smelling that new paint smell or that new kitchen smell when you're moving into that house. And the last thing that we're going to cover is drinking water. I think I'm going to put that over to you, Nicole.
Water is something that people are becoming more aware of, the importance of water filtration. It was something that, you know, I didn't learn in naturopathy. We just did 3 hours lecture on why we should drink 6 glasses of water a day, and that was it. Mind you, that was 30 odd years ago when I studied naturopathy. What we realize is water filtration is critical, that if you don't get a filter, your body and your kidneys become the filter. Now, water, they put a lot of stuff in water to make it pure. Chlorine, for example, is incredibly effective, one of the most effective antibacterials we have. However, you don't want to be ingesting an antibacterial into your gut, when we know that your gut microbiome plays an incredibly important role in your gut and mental health. So for no other reason, a water filter is critical, and a carbon filter, a simple carbon filter will remove chlorine. However, there are other contaminants in there. And when it comes to toxic metals, most of the toxic metals in the water supply will come from your pipes. The domestic pipes will be common, which of course is under your jurisdiction, not your water supplier or distributor. So knowing the age of the home tells the building biologist what type of pipes are likely to be there. Obviously inspecting in the subfloor if they've got one, to see if there's copper pipe or galv pipe or PVC pipe on the rare occasion is important, because we know that, you know, there was silver solder used on copper pipe and galv pipe in the 60s and 70s, and it's still leaching small amounts into the water. In copper pipe that's new, as it's oxidizing, it does release copper ions into the supply and can cause gastric. In fact, in high levels, it can present itself as an acute abdomen in patients if they're exposed to new copper that's oxidizing, normally within the first 3 to 5 years that it's laid. So if you're going to use copper, which is an amazing material, but it needs to be oxidized. You don't want the shiny copper. You want the, you know, it looks like it's already dull in color, so it's oxidized. Of course, very few people use it now because it's so expensive. And of course, if it's chlorinated, then it's going to pull more copper ions out of the pipe as well. So that's problematic. And of course, asbestos, you still find many parts of Melbourne and Sydney that have asbestos cement sheet around the mains distribution system. So, you know, that's the pipes that the councils use that are under our streets and our roads. And, you know, in the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, they allow thousands of asbestos cement fibres in the water supply. That's part of the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. Like, I wouldn't want to be ingesting that. And a simple sediment filter that costs you $20 will get rid of that. So why wouldn't you do that? Who wants to ingest asbestos fibres in their water supply? Because we know it doesn't cause asbestosis and lung cancers, but there is research to say it might contribute to digestive or colon cancers, etc., although the jury is still out. Why take the risk? The other one that's become a real problem of late is brass taps. The Australian government announced 3 months ago it's going to put $2 billion into replacing all the new brass taps since 2000, because brass taps can contain up to 6% lead components in the valves and within the componentry of the brass. So if you've got a brass tap that was purchased in the last 10 or 20 years, there's a good chance there's lead in it, which sort of defeats the purpose. So it's a real problematic. You should be looking at stainless steel taps, such as Vinco, which is one of the very few brands that guarantee no lead components. So that is definitely a problem. In fact, in my book, I talk about when the new children's hospital in Perth was built about 5 years ago, they had elevated levels of lead in the drinking water as a result of the use of brass taps. So you definitely don't want that. And of course, the other one is aluminium. They use alum salts as a flocculating agent. For example, I drink from Yarra Valley water and they get their water supply from the river. It has high levels of sediment, so they use alum as a flocculating agent to bind to the sediment and sink it so they can draw off the top water. But of course, you will have detectable levels of aluminium in your water supply. You only have to look at your drinking water contents, which your supplier will give you every year. I don't want aluminium in there, especially in light of concerns about, dementia and other things like that. And of course, fluoride is the big one. Most countries have never fluoridated their drinking water supply because it's unethical to mass medicate an entire population with a pharmaceutical drug, which fluoride is, because it's treating plaque and tooth decay. So fluoride is also sourced from toxic, either the phosphate fertilizer industry, and it is often associated with other toxic metals or radionucleotides. So you don't want fluoride in your water supply. It targets the pineal gland, but it also targets the thyroid. So there's more and more data coming out about its impact on thyroid function. And of late, its impact on IQ, especially if pregnant women are ingesting fluoridated tap water, then they can drop the IQ of their child by 7 years of age. That can drop their IQ by at least 2 points. And that's something you don't want either. So that's why a reverse osmosis filter is really important in order to remove the atoms like fluoride, which is the hardest atom to remove because it's the smallest in the periodic table. So again, if it's tank water, you'll need UV filtration because of the microbes that often will proliferate or be attracted to stagnant water. And of course, PVC downpipes, you'll have phthalates and lead stabilizers were used in PVC. And of course, most tank water has PVC pipe from the tank water to the house, exposed to the sun, so accelerates any VOCs breaking down into that water supply. And if you drink bore well water, you should be testing it every month because you just don't know whether it's again being contaminated upstream from pesticides, from farming, agriculture, or radionucleotides could also be in there as well. So look for NSF certification, National Sanitation Foundation certification, which is a worldwide certification for water filters. All right, so we offer packages to building a healthy home that can involve either phone consultation or various packages. For more information, refer to my website, buildingbiology.com.au, and or give us a buzz. So just to summarise, thanks for hanging out. We looked at location and the importance of where you buy your block of land and its proximity to known hazards. More information about that is in my book. Minimise condensation and mold. Be mindful about the wall structure, roof structure. The use of permeable wraps, Vapour wraps is really important, and making sure water vapour is removed from the indoor airspace through exhaust ventilation. Reducing exposure to EMFs by thinking about where things like meter panels are, fridges, etc. They're not backing up onto bedrooms, for example, and consider hard wiring if you can. Also minimise exposure to chemicals. And a lot of these chemicals can be things people bring in. You build this healthy home and then now everyone's using perfume and aftershave, or incense. Incense is incredibly toxic, or air fresheners. You don't want to bring that into a healthy home because you've just completely undone everything that you try to establish by designing a healthy home.
And one thing I always say to my clients is just make sure the builder doesn't have a cleaner come in and do the builder's clean and bring a whole lot of chemicals in, even to do the builder's clean. Get them to use natural products and microfibers and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to go through questions now. We've got a few here on the chat. So thank you so much. You're very welcome, Lynn. Bathroom silicone seems to attract mold, which seems impossible to remove. Can I comment on that? Silicone, once it's behind the silicone, you've actually got to remove the silicone. because it's behind it. Now, I know there are some options to put bleach, get some bleach and put it into there, but the reality is it means that there's water behind the silicon and there's microbial growth. So the only option with silicon is to actually remove it and replace it, unfortunately. Now, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
What can be done about a ribbed plastic shower outlet pipe which accumulates sludge? I would say to remove well, you just need to clean it, basically, as with all pipes and plumbing. You need to get in there with a brush and actually clean, especially if it's full of teenage hair and stuff like that. I think, the thing that keeps coming up for me as a building biologist is sitting down with clients and going, every house needs to be maintained and serviced, and that's often elbow grease, actually getting in there and cleaning gutters and all these things like this, getting into your outlets and your taps and cleaning them. Filtered bathing water is a good idea, absolutely. If you have eczema, I noticed massive differences in my clients who had eczema by simply getting a KDF shower filter. Carbon filter is not recommended because you get microbial growth on the carbon, especially with warm water, but KDF is definitely recommended. They're about $60 or $70. You'd have one on each outlet if it can fit, and it's definitely well worth it. The other option is to have whole house filtration. That is expensive because those cartridges you might have to replace every 2-3 months. But if you're willing to do that, then that's definitely worth it, and that can make a big difference. Are there any problems with passive house design versus passive solar design? Nell, did you want to comment on that at all?
Well, look, passive house design, because it has to be a lot more airtight. They use the blower tests, etc., and it does have to have heat recovery, mechanical heat recovery. Ventilation is part of a passive home. I haven't actually been involved in any passive home builds. I know Doug has been using the wraps, the actual membranes, which he really loves. And he's had some clients that are building not full passive house because they're building under him, obviously. He's not a certified passive house. And I have heard some really good things in relation to the ProClimate products. I've spoken to another builder who's used some down in Cape Patterson, again, not a full passive house, but he did notice specifically the dust load and the noise, where it was quite a remarkable difference from a standard wrap that he had noticed. I haven't looked a huge deal into passive house. I think there's definitely some merits for it. But yeah, what about you, Nicole? Did you have anything?
The main thing is because you're relying on the heat rate recovery unit. If the grid goes down, you need a backup generator, because it is quite airtight. You want the capacity, of course, to open up.
Which they do. They do promote that as well. With some, they don't like to use any sort of gas appliances in their builds because it is so airtight. So there would be other factors like that to take into consideration, I would think.
And if people brought in furnishings imported from Asia that had high levels of flame retardants and other things like that, they would not outgas very well. They would be imprinting within the walls, etc., if there's restricted passive ventilation. So I think it's a really good move to the right direction. My main issue would be if you're relying on mechanical ventilation, that if the grid goes down, which it does a lot in the area.
And it's not an air purification either. It's a fan over heat exchange unit, is my understanding.
Yeah.
I do believe the latest Your Home now has a section on passive house in it. So that could be used for if people were interested as well. So that's the first time I think that's actually appeared in that book. Yeah.
So this just came out 2 weeks ago, about $45. It's excellent. It's a set text in the course. So you get that directly from the government's website. It's
and they actually have a subject on passive house now, which is the first time that this has appeared in this publication. So for those that are interested in passive house, that could be a good place to start.
Why do we want to avoid dimmer switches? Dimmer switches emit high levels of dirty electricity, which is high frequency spikes from about 50 hertz right up until, the radio frequency range. People who are electrically sensitive tend to react. They also increase electric field exposures. So more and more people tend to be becoming electrically sensitive as a result of the Wi-Fi enabled devices that we've introduced in the last 10, 15 years. So that's generally why we don't want dimmer switches is something that we don't recommend. Okay, we have 4 people in a small 2-bedroom house and there are no spaces that aren't utilised. If that's the case, if you're getting any condensation in your home, I would strongly suggest the Band-Aid approach is to get a dehumidifier just to remove the excess water vapour in light of the fact you've got high occupancy in a small space. And that's only if you're getting condensation problems. So that will just be able to take that water vapour out of the air and reduce the chances of condensation and mould. Once you have condensation on the surface, you've got 48 hours after which there's microbial growth and mould starts to grow. So whenever you get condensation, you need to act pretty quick. Okay, I live under the flight path. Ooh, what's the best thing I can do to limit adverse health effects is close the windows and get an air filter fitted with a HEPA filter and also a carbon filter. So go with a good company. Innova Air is good. It's the only air filters that I sell. But yeah, you want to get a good air filter and keep the house sealed basically, and don't grow veggies in your veggie patch because it will have particulates and other things like that as a result of the VOCs emitted from the from the exhaust of the aeroplanes. So that's something also be mindful about. Will this meeting be available to watch later? Yes, it will be. So if you registered for this talk, this will be available. So go back and register if you haven't, and then we'll be sending out the recording to everyone who did register. What about maybe turn your video off? Okay, well, you're breaking up. There you go, go to the bottom. 4 new messages, let me see. Some good videos on passive house from a building biologist, Equilibrio. Yep, so Raf was one of our senior lecturers. He's got a great videos actually that he did on his home, converting it to passive house with a building biology flavour to it. So that was really good. That's equilibrio.com.au. Let me see. I think that's about it. So if you've got any other questions, please unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, that is it. If you wanted any more information about the courses, refer to the college website, aces.edu.au.